Welcome to Off Hours, a conversation between John Edwards and Chris Manning.
So, John, we have a special guest on this episode of the podcast, someone we've been speaking about quite a bit on the podcast recently.
Indeed. I'm very excited to have Christian Lass join us today for a little chat. His journey into watchmaking has been well covered elsewhere, so we'll link to some previous interviews he's done with Independent Thinking on Fifth Wrist Radio and the Keeping Time podcast from Oster Watches for anyone who'd like to get some more backgrounds on that. But rather than rehash all of that, I figured we'd take the conversation in a slightly different direction with him today and explore some perhaps more technically in-depth topics with him.
And it's probably a good thing that we did forego the information that he's already put out in other interviews, because I think we ended up talking for nearly 3 hours. Probably not a bad thing that we skipped some of the stuff that's already been covered.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it would have gone quite a bit longer if we delved into sort of the full backstory. But for anyone who is curious and just wants a quick introduction, Christian Lass is a Danish watchmaker, and he worked for a time for Søren Andersen doing some restoration work for the Royal Family there in Denmark, amongst other clients. And from there, he went on to work for the independent watchmaker Vianney Halter for a time, working on projects like the Cabestan. And then he was the head watchmaker, and not just head watchmaker, the only watchmaker for the Patek Philippe Museum for close to a decade. Mm-hmm. He is an independent watchmaker, a speaker, and a teacher. And you can find out more about his teaching over at learnwatchmaking.com, more about the watchmaker himself at christianlass.com and christianlass.dk. And, of course, he's an excellent follow on Instagram at Christian_Lass. Welcome to the show, Christian.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you for letting me in on this amazing podcast. Been listening to quite a few episodes of this, and it's really interesting.
It's our pleasure. What was life like for young Christian Lass growing up in Denmark? And what was it that drew you to study GSM and Bluetooth and the like, and how has that education as an engineer influenced your approach to watchmaking?
When you're growing up, it's really, you always ask when you're little, what do you want to become when you're big, and in the beginning it's like firefighters and police and stuff like this, and in the end, I think most people, when you look at it, it kind of becomes the same as the parents, more or less, or get in the same direction. So my parents is my father is an engineer, mechanical engineer, and building pharmaceutical installations, like production lines and stuff like that. And my mother been like a pharmacist for all her career. So basically, I was thinking when I grew up, like engineering. I knew that from my father. It seems like really like interesting, and I had this interest for electronics. I became like one of the first youngest ham operators, like what's called like one is with radio, what's called wire set and Morse and all this kind of stuff, and then I was really curious about like the electronics, and it was basically because I didn't really understand it. So I went to the university and studied electronic engineering, and I really catch on there. And I went into this chip production where you can do all the silicium and all this, and also with some of the first Bluetooth. Where I was helping some of the PhD students with doing some task there. So in my spare time, I help with that, and then I just continue with my study on the side for that. There was nothing in the stars written that I have become like a watchmaker from beginning. That's for sure.
It sounds like we're fortunate that you were in Denmark and the GSM market there sort of collapsed, because I think if we were in Silicon Valley, we probably would have lost you to the tech world instead of the watch world.
Yeah, absolutely. But I mean, in life, there always comes like these kind of roadblocks, and when you experience them, it's kind of, like you think it's almost the end of your life. You think, damn, like now I've been studying like this for years, and now there's no like job opportunity afterwards for what you're studying. But actually, in my life, I always experienced these kind of blocks come, it always something better always come up. And in my case, it was like watchmaking that just popped out of the blue by finding a book in the library.
Mm-hmm. So what is the name of the watchmaking school there in Denmark?
Yeah, it's called the Danish School of Watchmaking. So it's there's only one school in Denmark, and now it's called like ZBC. I can't even remember what it stands for, but it's just the Danish School of Watchmaking. We only have one school here in Denmark, and in Denmark, since we are a country that doesn't produce watches, we are educated in restoration work and in after sales service. So this is like the main topics that you learn in school, and that was like, for me, it was extremely interesting in my apprentice time, because I was lucky to get apprenticed to one of the earlier academy members of the ACI, Mr. Søren Andersen, not the Sven Andersen, but Søren Andersen, who was building like antique clocks and planetariums and all this. So I spent 4 years in his workshop, which was absolutely magic. I mean, we was making some really, really interesting objects there. All the kind of objects that came through his workshop was not something you will see anywhere else. I mean, I made everything from champion clocks to a 6 meter long telescope, Jens Olsen's world clock, all these kind of extremely complicated and very, very interesting thing. And that was something that was really inspirational, and also Mr. Andersen have like a huge library of watchmaking and art and all this stuff, where I spent like most of my time just reading and get to know as much as I can about like watchmaking, and that was like a huge inspiration, and still is to today, like this foundation that was laid at that time.
So it sounds like the work that you're doing at Søren's shop, you were learning sort of larger machining skills, not just the work that a watchmaker is necessarily doing to make parts, but even working on larger pieces like clocks and other things. So it sounds like you got a pretty good foundation in machining there as well.
Yes, absolutely. So basically in my apprentice place in Mr. Andersen's workshop there, that was antique clocks and scientific instruments and all these sort of things. And in the school, I learned all about like wristwatches. So in the workshop, of course, you don't have any spare parts, so you have to make everything. And then you have to learn like machining, milling, and turning, right, and all these things.
And making your own tools for things that you don't have tools for and whatnot, and jigs and things like that.
Yes, absolutely. And also just like the thing of when you do like restoration on this level, you have to look at kind of which kind of material is it. So you do like analysis of the materials, so you can see what is the composition inside, because who knows what they put in the brass, like in 1600 something. So they just took whatever they had. And if you have to restore something and then there's a part missing, and then you have to make like a small bridge or whatever, then you have to have material in exact same composition, so you cannot see it afterwards. And then you do like the chemical analysis, and then you ask like the one who is casting, like the caster, to make you exactly that mix of material, and then you get the raw material and do all the steps that you need to do. For example, in the old days, all the brass pieces was like hammered together, so they were like compressed. So you will first have a casting that was like almost twice as high, and then afterwards you will hammer it down to be like really compact, to eliminate all like bubbles and all this that's in the material, and also make it like extremely hard. So that was all these like ancient techniques that I was learning right from beginning. And that was basically also the foundation for my later career in Switzerland.
So what sort of equipment was Søren using for analyzing the various metals that you guys were working with?
Yeah, but there you will just take a little scrape off, like some chips off, and you send it to a laboratory that can do like test work. And then you will get just like a piece of paper back that says like, and so many percent zinc, and there's so many percent copper, and so on. And many times you can see they just put in whatever they had, like it's like a lead and copper and zinc and what have you, and sometimes also like aluminium, and everything just mixed together. So it's it's not always so easy to get, like an exact same material, and sometimes, as I said, you have to produce it.
So Søren Andersen's formal training was in conservation.
Yes.
How is your time in his shop informed the way that you approach restoration work? And do you draw a distinction between conservation and restoration work?
Yes, absolutely. Restoration, let's say, that is like to bring a piece back exactly to the state it was when it left, like the maker. And then it can be, it depends on which degree you do it. Sometimes you want to leave a little traces of the history that it gone through. For example, if you don't want to take all the scratches and marks away, because then it kind of loses the originality of the piece, where conservation is more about like stopping the decay and then stopping the piece in exactly that state that it's in when, like right now. So for example, if you have like one of the clocks from the 1600, like in the end it's like 1580 around there, you have these kind of drum watches, for example. They're often like extremely rusted and so, because everything is made in iron. And then there, for example, if you restore it back to original condition and running condition, you will not have the same kind of object anymore, because you have to remake so many parts and redo everything. Then when you look at the piece afterwards, yes, it looks good and everything, but it's not the original piece, and you don't see the original work anymore. So their conservation is like a better choice, where you stop the process. There's like many different ways, like either chemical or electrochemically. You can go in and stop the decaying process, and stop the oxidation and all these things. So this was also techniques that I used a lot in my apprentice time, and was taught all these kind of various distinctions between one and the other. And also just to analyze like rust. When you see like something simple as rust, you see some red stuff coming out of your steel parts. Then it's actually like 3 different layers depending on how many electrons it have consumed. So you first you have like the red layer. Under that you have like a black layer, and in the end you have like a layer that you cannot see. So if you just remove like the rust, like the red layer, then you can see afterwards that you'll get like some black powder underneath, and then you continue remove that, and then often if you don't know that, and then you will just stop when that there's nothing more to see. But actually the rust is like deep in the material, and it will start rusting exactly in the same spot afterwards, because these atoms that are like changed in the first stage that you cannot see yet, that are ready to transform to the second stage, will then later transform, and then start the process will just start over. This kind of layers you can, with electrolysis, stop this kind of transformation, and then make like the decaying process like to stop it, and then you can keep the pieces for a very long time afterwards. So this is just some of the techniques. There's many more you can use for it.
So it does sound like, based on your work as a restorer for Søren, and then also your watchmaking school experience there, you really were perfectly placed to work for Patek in their museum and doing work there, because you really did have the perfect education to work for them.
Yeah, I mean, I was not the one to decide if I was. You heard the story before, but the industry, like in 2009, everything was bad, and I had to kind of look for another job, and I was talking with like many people, and in the end I was talking with Dufour, who was mentioning that there was this opportunity in the Patek Museum, and I honestly thought I was going to be, like watchmaker number 10 in the corner that have to polish a screw or something like that. I had no idea that it was one like the watchmaker to take care of the whole museum. So I just wrote an application, and in the middle of the interview, I kind of realized that the job was to take care of the whole collection. So
you were going to be the guy.
Exactly. So I had no idea when I started, but then of course, I mean, they tested me for months before I went in. And I mean, nobody is let in on a collection like this without they know what they're doing. So in the end, I went through all the processes and all the tests, and I get the job afterwards. So yes, my former education, I think most of all my interest for learning and always like reading, like I don't know how many hundreds of old books I've been reading, and I taught myself the Gothic like scriptures, because all the German books are written in all these strange letters that you normally cannot read, and then just have literally like plowing through like hundreds of books in order to get the information, because many of the books are. And at that time, it was kind of, they didn't really describe the processes. They only described like what was difficult. And at the time, it was often like mathematics and like gear calculations and all this. So they will spend like 40 pages on telling how the shape of a T should be. And then in the end, they say like, we just built the wheel like normal. Okay, cool. That doesn't help me very much. But
yeah, I've done some research in a number of historical techniques like niello making and things like that. And it's frustrating when you're reading these 15th, 16th century treatises and they say, do this in the usual way.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
You're like, well, that's what I want to know. What is the usual way
exactly.
here? I don't have any clue what that is.
Then later they discover books that actually explain the processes. That is like, there's like a German book by Martens. It's like it's a small book, and then there's an extra book with all the drawings. That one is like phenomenal. Of course, it's in German, but it just explains like step by step everything. That was kind of the go-to book for restoration work, to know how to do all these kind of like steps in the process there.
So what was the testing process like to land that job at Patek? It sounds like it was quite arduous.
Yeah, I was first like in the factory, where I was like tested on the normal watches, like stuff that can replace if I basically destroyed it, So if they were just like the modern calibers, and then more and more complicated. And then afterwards, I was 3 months testing time in the museum before I get the job there.
What are some of the makers and manufacturers' work that you were exposed to while at the Patek Philippe Museum that you most admire?
I mean, the museum is such a, magnificent place. I mean, there's like, if you're interested in watchmaking, there's just the best of the best for the last 500 years. So it's hard just to pick some of them. But I think like some of them, like what I really admire is like the early Patek work. That is really, really interesting. And then there's like the early chronometer makers like Berthoud and these people. And then there's the Swiss Oyer. He made like also some fabulous stuff, like the really early chronometer maker in Switzerland. And his apprentice, like Sylvain Marais, he was also doing like some awesome stuff. It's like super simple, but it's just made to perfection everything, and kind of try to solve some of the problems that there was in the early watchmaking at Oyer and Sylvain Marais' time, where for example with the profile of the teeth and stuff like this. So instead of having pinions with like 8 leaves, he added like a wheel. So you'll have like 5 wheels in the gear train instead of 4. And then this what is called, then you will have like 16 leaves in all the pinions instead, and just like interesting stuff like that. And the last one I really admire. I mean, that is such a little bit underrated watchman. Nobody really talks about it so much. Of course, you can see it on the auction prices now. That kind of kicks off now with this maker is like Albert Potter, who is an American watchmaker who worked in the American watch industry there. I think he was a tool maker or something in the beginning, and then he had like a long story where he also worked as a watchmaker in Cuba, when Cuba was some kind of holiday paradise for the state. And then later he came to Switzerland, and then he merged like the Swiss way of making watches with the American, and there just comes some like really, really amazingly beautiful pieces out of it, and the craftsmanship in his watches are just like insane. I mean, the finish and all this on these pieces, I mean, I never seen anything like it in any piece. And this is some watches that are normally there's not so much talk about them, but it's starting to gain a little bit on the auction scene with these watches as well.
Are there particular pieces by Potter in the Patek collection that you most admire?
Yes, I mean they had one. I don't remember the number of it. I think it was like number 155. I'm not 100% sure, but it was a pocket chronometer with a constant force deton escapement inside. So that was one I restored. I had no idea really about Potter before, but we have to make. One of my main jobs in the Patek Philippe Museum, that was like to make pictures of the movements. I was not standing there with camera, but like to prepare the movements for the photographer, so they could take pictures of it, so we could make like catalogs and publicity material and all this. And therefore, I have basically taken most of the collection. I would say like 80% of everything I had out, and take movements out and take everything apart and looked into it. So that was also like an amazing learning experience to see all these pieces live instead of just inside the showcase.
Do you know if those photographs are available to the public if they want to get access to them, or is that just something that's being used as a reference internally?
Yeah, no, most of them is like reference internally, of course, and then there's like the books, the catalogs. There's the really big book of Peter Fries, and that is the curator and director of the museum. He made this enormous book of the antique collection in the museum, and there I think we made something like 3,000 photos or something like that, and that is inside this book. I think you can just order them directly from the Patek site. It's a fantastic book if you're into antique watchmaking.
Yeah, another gentleman with the initials AP, whose work I quite admire from a similar era, not Audemars Piguet, that would be two fellows, is Albert Pelletan. Have you been exposed to any of Pelletan's work in all of your restoration?
Yes, absolutely. That was Pelletan, I made from James Caesar Pelletan, the tourbillon maker. When I started in the museum in 2009, it must have been in 9 or in 10, I made the chronometer, what's called a collection. So that was all the Pelletan tourbillon watches and the watches that went for the observatory competition in Geneva. So Pelletan's work is also absolutely fantastic. That is especially like his tourbillon cases. That is like, and that's also no, like I've never seen anything like these cases he made there. That is also really, really fantastic.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, truly sublime stuff. I think if I could only have one tourbillon pocket watch, I'd probably settle on a Pelletan.
Yeah, absolutely. It's not a bad choice. That or Oyer or something like that. That would be amazing. And also when we talk about the tourbillons, I was also doing not really restoration, was more like cleaning work where we clean the movements. There was of the Patek like 34T movement. And 34S and all these. These are also like really, really amazing movements. I mean, that is they really, really push every limit to make these watches as precise as possible, and still they have like an aesthetical part. Like the round. There's basically like a square, a 34T, and a round one. And the round one that is made by I think it's made by André what's called Bonin and Sibach. It is absolutely amazing work that is inside. Also, like a normal tourbillon, have like a fairly big case, and the balance wheel, especially in the modern ones, are really small. So you have this gigantic case and a small balance wheel. But here they just push everything, so the pillars are like C-shaped, so they could accommodate like a really, really, really big balance inside this tourbillon case, and then with like beryllium, I think it was beryllium, what's called main plates in the case to make it like anti-magnetic and all this. So this was really interesting stuff.
I feel sorry for the poor machinist who had to make that.
Yeah.
A very healthy endeavor to undertake. So have you had the opportunity to work on any of Patek's Halo pieces, like the Grave Super Complication or the Caliber 89, Star Caliber 2000 and the like?
Yes, I have worked with that was the Caliber 9. I just worked with in general, like for museum work, taking in and out and this and take some pictures of it. So I never really worked on that.
In some of your previous interviews, you were talking a little bit about sort of modern Patek being watches that were made in the last 50 years. And those were the kinds of watches that you could get parts for because they still existed in the archive. What sort of percentage of modern Pateks versus older pieces, maybe not even from Patek, that you had to work on in the collection? Like, what was the sort of percentage of each of them?
But basically, I mean, I never worked with modern Pateks. I mean, I think the latest one I worked with was like from the 1970s or something, and then. Okay. What I worked most with in the Patek collection was the like pelotons and the big, high complicated pocket watches, like all these triple complications, and then I made quite a few of these what's called like the 2499, that value movement with a perpetual calendar on top. These sort of movements. That was what I did. So I don't have really any experience in the modern ones. Right. So it's I only have in the vintage pieces.
Well, that's probably the more interesting bit, anyways. They're the modern ones you can work on sort of anywhere, but the vintage stuff is the stuff that you're not going to be able to just get a hold of and be able to work on.
Yeah, I mean, for like a reliability point of view, yes, absolutely. I would also say like the modern Pateks. I mean, there's also some really really crazy movements that are super interesting, like the minute repeaters and the Caliber 300, like the most complicated wristwatch. When I see the Patek watches, I mean, like the modern ones, they're really, really a lot of details that people don't really realize, how many operations that goes into just make something as a wheel or something like this in order to get like this high finish of all the parts. And that is something, I mean, I really would love to work on some of the modern calibers as well.
Now, over the past decade and a bit, Patek has been slowly introducing some silicium components into their own watches. And you mentioned earlier on in the show that you studied somewhat about some silicon fabbing and the like. Would you yourself ever put a silicium part in one of the watches you're making, or is that taboo for you?
I don't know if it's taboo. I think it's interesting. It also depends, like watchmaking is a little bit like just like music. I mean, it depends what kind of style you're playing. Of course, like Patek is very classical, so of course it was quite a new thing that they put in silicium parts. But from a technical point of view, I mean, silicium makes a lot of sense. It's fairly easy to manufacture, and it's fairly easy to replicate, extremely precise. So you can make like really really precise hairsprings. And the Patek one is quite ingenious because it's mixing, like an overcoil spring with a flat hairspring. So basically, like an overcoil hairspring will expand equally all the way, so the center of gravity will remain in the center, and that is not the case with a standard flat hairspring. And Patek, they incorporated like basically like vary the thickness of the hairspring with the silicium one. So they can make like a flat hairspring behave like an overcoil hairspring, and therefore make like extremely flat watches with a great accuracy. If I ever want to use it myself, I don't know. I don't think so. It's not really my thing. I mostly like the more classical thing, and also something that you can like replicate in the future. Let's say like one of my watches, like 100 years from now, go into like a watchmaker or somebody who's restoring watches and have to have like a new hairspring. That is, at the moment, is difficult with silicium. I mean, you never know in the future, but for now it would be something extremely difficult to have made just like one. I mean, it's easy enough to go to a manufacturer in Switzerland and say that you want like 10,000, but just to have one, it's that's a different story.
Yeah, that's something we've talked about a number of times. The challenges of you can make one of something without too much effort. You can make 1 million of something without too much effort, but making 10 of something or 100 of something becomes really challenging in the watch world.
Yeah, exactly. But the thing is that it's the amount of time that I've seen how it works inside. Like first you have to have a constructor that is making the drawings, then you send it on to another engineer that is then making it the drawings, like right form machinery, and then you send it to a machinist that to one that does the coding for the machines, and then there's like for some of the components you need like 5-6 different machines that all have to be set up with like extreme precision. And so to make one piece, when you set up a machine, you do first just like a test round where it maybe takes like 50 to 100 pieces before you have one piece correct, because you're adjusting all the cutters and how deep they should go and so on. And then of course when it's set up, then it just can run like over and over and over again. If the cycle time for making, let's just say like a pinion is maybe, I don't know, like 30 to 1 minute, like in like 30 seconds to a minute, then like if you calculate how many like minutes that there is in 24 hours, then you can see how many pinions you can make in a day, and it really quick gets like a lot of pinions, and that's why like the production price for 1,000 is almost the same as for one.
Yeah. It doesn't make sense to spend a day or two setting up a machine and then just make 100 of them.
No.
You're better off letting that machine run for 2 weeks and make a year's supply of that part instead.
Exactly.
Or in the case of an independent watchmaker, it's a lifetime supply.
Yeah. Of course. I mean that's also one of our, I would say it's like an advantage that many of us can like make pinions and wheels. Of course, it takes like a long time and just to make one off like a one wheel, but it also makes us like really like free and creative to do like different models because many of us can make all these parts. So instead of that, you have to turn around like a huge manufacturing process. That is like a whole different story. So when you just make like small series of 10 to 100 watches, then it's like easy enough to make like a little change or big change to the production. Where if you're manufacturing, I don't know, many thousand pieces, then it's not so easy.
When you worked at the Patek Philippe Museum, you had 2 workshops, one public-facing and one behind the scenes. And at Vianney Halter, you had access to just about any tool you could possibly need to fabricate a part. Now that you're back in Denmark, what is your studio setup like, and in what ways, if any, did your time with Patek and Vianney and Søren Andersen inform your current setup?
Oh yeah, that's actually a good question, because machinery, if you want to make a watch, you'll really quick realize that you need a ton of tools and a ton of machinery, and a lot of it, especially now, the prices are really going up very, very fast. So therefore you need like a huge investment to get all these machines. I have been very fortunate to be in an industry, especially in Switzerland, where the availability of machines was really high. I found like a lot of machines in Switzerland, and for really like a fair price. But also by working, especially with an independent watchmaker, one of really like a genius in machinery and also in watchmaking in general, like Vianney Halter. There I really saw which machines is usable and which machine is not. Like that is really, like you have like some fundamental machines like pillars that you have to have, like you have to have like something where you can measure. So something like an optical, like a profile projector, for example, that is like essential, because you cannot sit with small measuring instrument like a vernier gauge and measure the parts. So therefore, like a profile projector is essential. Pointing machine is essential when you want to make like small production, because like what the pointing machine does, for one who doesn't know it, is just it makes like small points that you can then use later to center your drills when you want to drill holes precise. And that is really essential as well, because if you really look at it, like a watch is just 2 plates with holes drilled in the right places. And that is really, like when you first understand that you need precise drilling and you need precise measurement, then you can pretty much do everything afterwards. Then it's just a matter of building the component that goes in between that frame that you have built. And then as well, I have like a wheel cutting machine to make like miniature wheels. So I have a Dixie wheel cutting machine, which is like a small hand operating machine it was not made in that many. I have only seen, I think, like 4 or 5 of them. I know Vianney have one of them or 2, and Defour have one, Kari have one, and then there's what's called Stu have one, and from this 738 workshop. And I think that's all the machines I've ever seen of this Dixie one, and then I have one. And the clever thing about this machine is what it was made for prototyping. So it's really slow. I mean, you can make 1 or 2 wheels at the time. But the cool thing about it is that it's really, really easy to set up and adjust. Because you can easy enough get, like a big production wheel cutting machine that will do everything automatically. But the problem with these machines is that first of all, they always set up just to produce like one type of wheel. So it's really hard to change like the number of teeth on the wheels because you have to then make like new gears and all this for the machines in order to do like a different division. So there's a lot of machining and a lot of expenses in making parts just to change the number of teeth on a wheel. So this machine goes like for nothing normally when you see them in Switzerland. It's like I don't even know what you can. They work like a screw cutter, like a generation machine thing's called. Those machines, I mean, you're really tempted in the beginning to buy one like that because wow, I can make like 100 wheels an hour. But it's when you can only make one that is like 6 million in diameter with 80 teeth and
yeah, that's very limiting, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly.
I have to say, one of the machines that I've seen in your Instagram feed, and I think I may have commented on it when you posted it, was you have a case making lathe, which is designed to trace the profile of another part to turn the case. And I think maybe this might actually be the first post of yours that I ever saw. I think my friend Phil Poirier actually sent it to me because he knew I was working on some watch cases. And I can honestly say I've never seen one of these lathes before. It's it almost combines a machinist lathe with a freehand, sort of wood turning lathe, but also pattern following at the same time. It really is an intriguing machine, and I can honestly say I've never seen anything like that before.
Yeah. That is also like another example of when you've been like an insider in the industry, and I've seen like these workshops where they did like restoration of cases and could build like new cases, and where they work with this sort of machines, and then afterwards when I went searching for machinery for making cases, because I knew for when I want to start for myself, one of the things that I want to do myself was like case making. Because I find it, first of all, it's such a really a nice craft to do the case making, because it's so nice to do like the sculpturing of the case and all the design and all this, and it mixes kind of this very precise mechanics that we are making with like art and sculpture and all this, and that is one of the things that I really like. So finding these machines, I found like a whole. Like a whole lot of basically like closed up case making workshop that have just that has been standing in the back of a big stock of tools on some what's called like a pallet, what's called like the one for transporting stuff. And when I get them, there was like 5 centimeters of dust and dirt and stuff and stuff. And the guy just told me under there somewhere there's some really cool machines. So just like okay, and so I bought. And the thing is also, like with case making, it also takes a lot of machines, because like the thing with case making is that you have to change tools all the time, because then you have to turn inside, you have to turn a groove for this and that. And you have to do it in so many different places, especially if you make like a 3-piece case as I make, then just like the front bezel there's like 2 sides on, and then you have the middle part is also two sides, and then the back case also have like a side on that, and all this have to be like immensely precise in order to fit together, especially if you make like a click case.
They snap together.
Yeah, exactly, like when they're snapping together. therefore I have like 4 of these. I think you also saw in my feed where it is like a revolver lathe, with where there's like on each lathe there's like 8 tools. So you have like 3 tools that turns on the outside of the diameter and 4 tools on the inside. And but you need like 4 of these machines, like and if I didn't have seen workshops like this and see how they were working, I would never have known that. I've just bought one and then I would get crazy from standing and setting up all these tools. So basically, when you want to make a case, you set up each lathe with the tools you need, and then all of it should fit together afterwards when you produce the parts.
Yeah, I was introduced to those turret lathes at David Lindo. He's a clockmaker in Pennsylvania. Yeah. He showed me how he sets his stuff up. And unfortunately, a lot of these tools are just not commonly available in North America. And we don't have the access to the older machines like you do. We didn't have nearly as many workshops doing that kind of work. I've actually been building a custom CNC lathe for doing a lot of that work because I was finding the same frustrations where I was constantly needing to change out tools to do the inside, outside diameter work and everything. And it was just, unfortunately, without access to those turret lathes, it's a little challenging to do on a manual machine that's just too slow. So I'm actually building a CNC lathe to do that.
Yeah. Because you can do a lathe like a case in a normal lathe, like a Schaubling 102 or something like that. That is not a problem. It's only gonna take like very long time, and you will never have like a consistent result because you have to change tools like a lot of times.
Exactly, yeah, and you have to make a decision in your life: is what do I want to be doing? Do I want to be sitting and turning the same thing over and over again, or do you want to be spending the time doing the challenging work that you're better suited for?
Yeah, definitely.
And while you do the majority of your work on manual machines, you do still have a CNC machine in the shop as well, right?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I have a CNC machine because just like there's a lot of people thinking like handmade watches, then you make everything by hand. And if you, as we touched on a little bit before, if you have to make everything by hand, the watch is going to be totally unpayable afterwards. In watchmaking, ever since like whenever watches was made, machine have always been used in watchmaking. Before it was small, like drill presses and stuff that was set up in a way so you could produce parts, and then the machines became more and more advanced, and so the last at least 100 years has been used with like cam operated machines. And,
right.
And those machines had then been replaced with what we call CNC today, which has become like a really bad word in watchmaking. But what it means is actually the machine is just controlled with an electric engine instead of a mechanical mechanism. So I don't see like a big problem in producing like some of the raw forms of the watches with the electronic control milling machines, because it saved me a lot of work that I can then put into making like better work in the other end. So the process of making a watch when I do it is maybe like 20% of the work is like the machinery work, and the rest is the handmade and the handcrafted pieces and the decorating part and all this.
I can appreciate the sentiment there. I started out. I come from a jewelry background and then started making fountain pens, and I was making complex threads and doing them by hand, but it becomes tedious and it's easy to make mistakes. And there's a lot of similar things in watchmaking where you end up with sort of tedious and repetitive work that's difficult to do well if you're doing it manually, but a machine can do it quickly. And you're really not losing any of the spirit of the watch and the artistry of the watch if you have a machine do these repetitive tasks that are not particularly interesting. Like they're not really adding a lot of value to the work. And I think a lot of people are, as you say, CNC is sort of a dirty word in watchmaking and in collecting. But at the end of the day, if it means that I can make some more watches or I can spend more time doing the interesting things that I'm actually good at, in my case, things like engine turning and enamel work and things like that, I would rather spend my time adding value to what I'm doing by doing that work that can't be done by a machine, and let a machine do the things that it's good at that I'm just bored doing. Like it it's too repetitive.
Yeah, but also you have to remember in the old days, like labor was really cheap compared to,
Sure.
to today. So in the old days, instead of having automatic machines to do it, you just had like an army of people to do it instead.
Yeah.
But today that is unpayable. So if I have to have somebody to replace that, I have to have like at least 5-6 employees in my workshop.
Sure.
Yeah, to make that, or I have to work like 5-6 times as long to do like a piece. So therefore it makes sense to make that. And also as a footnote, I mean, I don't know of any watchmaker that are living from making watches that are not using CNC. I mean, that is
exactly
because there's a lot of projects out there like handmade and do everything small laser, just like I show in my masterclass course. But of course, like the masterclass course that is designed to teach you watchmaking and all the different ways to do it, and not to make money and to make like a watch brand that is completely different, a completely different business. So if you have to make a business out of making watches, then you have to use you have to what is called optimize your workflow to
Right.
produce the pieces needed.
Yeah, I call my CNC machines my mechanical apprentices, because that's really what they're doing. They're filling the role
Yeah, exactly.
that an apprentice would have 100 years ago or 150 years ago. But as you say, the finding inexpensive labor today who can do the work is challenging. In fact, in a situation like mine where I'm living in Ottawa, I can't find people who are actually skilled to do that work. And so it's difficult for me. Even if I wanted to pay somebody to do it, it would be challenging for me to find somebody who could actually do it. So it is sort of replacing that apprentice system for me. And it's an important part of my business, because as you say, if you want to make a living off of this, it's impossible to do all of these things, by hand and completely manually.
Absolutely.
Yeah, the only person offhand I can think of who's still doing everything by hand, and I believe he's still alive, I certainly hope he's still alive, is Christian Klings. But you're certainly right. I mean, everyone is using CNC machines, and there's no reason it should be a dirty word. I mean, Roger Smith is using them. I mean, Kari Voutilainen has been profiled and featured by Haas. Philippe Dufour's got wire EDM machines doing his main plates for him.
Exactly.
It's a force multiplier.
No, exactly. I mean, the parts that you see the other are using, I mean, they come from somewhere. They're not just made in the workshop. Otherwise, it would be impossible to make everything. So of course they have like suppliers making the different things, and then some people like Roger don't really have many suppliers, and it really depends. Or Kari, or that's all made like in-house, but they also have like a huge staff compared to that. But it also depends if I want to make my watch without making like a main plate and making like different what's called like setting system and different system for a dial and all this. Then I could also make it where you say like I do all handmade and I turn like 3 bridges in the faceplate lathe, just and then it's like I don't really think you can call that handmade either, because then you have made like 30% of the watch by putting new plates on, but the rest is still made and manufactured by a machine, just like by somebody else. So that is I don't know. So it's like a little bit like a muddy term with this like handmade, because of course it's made with help from machinery, because nobody can sit and file and turn out like micro precise parts.
I was going to say in the jewelry world, turning something on a manual lathe is still not considered handmade. There are legal definitions of handmade in the jewelry world, and you couldn't actually call something that you turned manually in a lathe handmade. As you say, are you going to take a file and start filing out all of your wheels by hand? I mean, that at what point do you say, oh, this is a handmade watch? It gets ridiculous.
Yeah, exactly. What I want to say is like what I think is important is that it's like, I would more say like human made. Instead of it's made in some kind of big production line, where it's when you see some of the like production lines of watches, not like the high-end brands, but a lot of the middle ones. I mean, there's basically no people really touching the product anymore. It's more when you see like a car manufacturer with a different kind of like automatic machines doing most of the operation. So I think in that respect, it's more like making like a piece made by a human for humans. Like that is a kind of a thing. And I think it's also something that is really, when you are collecting watches or anything else like collectible, if there is some like person behind it, like some kind of artist that have made it, it makes a lot stronger connection to you. It's just like if you go to IKEA and buy a painting made by a robot, or however they're doing. They have like these ones that make with brushes. It's just like a nice canvas with paint on, but it's nothing more than that. But if it's made by an artist that stand there and use like a ton of time painting this painting for you, it's a completely different experience, and that is what I want to capture with my watches.
Yeah, I think the individual who's making it is more important than the processes per se, and also the individual is more important than the location as well. I know a lot of people make a big deal out of, oh, this is made in Switzerland, or this is made in America, or this is made in whatever country. But at the end of the day, if I'm the artist, it doesn't matter where I'm making this piece. I could be making it anywhere. The important thing is that I'm the one who's making it, or it's a Christian Lass watch. It doesn't matter so much if that Christian Lass watch is made in Denmark or Switzerland or wherever. It's more important that you're the one who's making it. And again, it doesn't matter so much that how you're actually making it. It's more that the intention behind it is yours, and you're the one who's responsible for it.
Absolutely. I mean, of course, I think that's a little bit different depending on where it is. I mean, you see like American watchmaking have its flavor to it. You can definitely trace some kind of style to that. The Swiss watchmaking have another one,
right,
and so on. And the German watchmaking it's completely different, and that is something I kind of like as well. That there's some kind of just like with wine, it's the same grapes, but it can taste different depends on where it's located in the world.
And the reality as well is that we are so interdependent. None of us can do this wholly by ourselves. Even George Daniels was sourcing his jewels. I'm sure he'd shaped the odd one, but for the most part, he was sourcing his jewels, getting his hairsprings from Hamilton and the like. None of us as watchmakers can make absolutely everything. We need to depend on one another, and there are different people with different skills, and it's the amalgamation of all these things that allow us to even consider creating a piece that we have a vision for. There has to be someone who has the driving force and the vision, of course, but we rely on each other to actually make these creations happen.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's also one of my big philosophy in what I do is to use the best people for the work. That is it's not so important that, because I cannot be like 100% in everything, like that's impossible,
right.
Like I cannot be, like an amazing guy in producing parts and doing finishing and doing this and that and doing engraving and doing dial design and do, like this. In watchmaking, you have to know the same as, like many different occupations. In one, you have to be a great machinist, a great designer, a programmer, like you name it. And it's and to put that everything into to one person, that is impossible. So therefore, I think it's really important that one have like a good vision of what we want to accomplish, and then find the right people to accomplish that task in order to make like a superior product.
Yeah, one distinction that I appreciate, I've heard you make before, is that collectors who are collecting from these mass-produced watches, they're collecting references, whereas or reference numbers, to be more matter of fact, whereas someone who's buying a last timepiece or a Voutilanen timepiece or a Dufour, they're collecting craftsmanship.
Yeah, definitely. In the beginning, when I started watchmaking, I also like studied all the books about. I knew all the reference of Rolex and Patek and all this. But I kind of became like pretty hollow because there was not so much more to that it was just like more like a treasure hunt for the number and just say, okay, I have that one. And that is also fine. That's another way of collecting. But when you get a little bit deeper into watchmaking and you can appreciate the different crafts that are inside, which I can see with the collectors I'm working with, that it takes quite some years to develop that kind of expertise to really can see what makes like a Cari watch or a Dufour watch or Vianney watch or my watch or whatever like different from the rest, because there is this like human factor and like the perfection in the parts that really makes like a really like a big difference that is like super interesting for both as a personal aspect, for that you get the connection with the person who have made it, of course, and also that you have this kind of unique piece of art that you can bring with you on your wrist.
Thanks for listening to Off Hours. You can find detailed show notes at offhours.show. If you'd like to keep up to date with the show, follow us on Twitter @offhours. John can be found on Twitter @UnderTheLoop, and Chris can be found on Twitter and Instagram @silver_hand.